Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. Syria's new self-proclaimed president, Ahmed al-Shara, also known as Abu Muhammad al-Julani, cannot erase his past. Under a different alias, he was a jihadist terrorist joining the fight against the United States and the West at large after the atrocities of 9/11 and celebrating Al-Qaeda's heinous crimes against the free world. These days, he goes out of his way to play the statesman, but the onus remains on him to convince the world that he and his henchmen have undergone a complete transformation. The lingering suspicion is that once firmly established in power, his true character will be unveiled from under the diplomatic suits and ties. Joining us to analyze this matter as well as dissect the whole composition of this new Damascus regime, retired Brigadier General Mark Emmett, formerly a U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Political and Military Affairs. It's good to see you, General.
Jonathan.
Also joining us is Colonel in Reserve Dr. Hanan Wehbe, who is a research fellow at the Institute for Counterterrorism at Reichman University, as well as a lecturer at Haifa University, formerly a strategist for the Prime Minister's office here in Jerusalem. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Dr. Hanan.
Thank you. Shalom.
And also with me here in the studio is our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, set the stage for us.
So it's not Ahmed Club yet in Syria. The country is, of course, still struggling after the 57 years or so, or 54 years of the Assad dynasty. And al-Shara is trying to promise the sort of Syrian democracy, which has never really been there. But in 4 or 5 years, one suspects that while he may not get 98% of the vote when it comes, it will be close to it because dictators come and go in Syria. It happened even before Hafez Assad. And while he's doing that, he also wants to play the statesman on the regional stage, going to Turkey to have talks with his supporter Erdogan, and now this week coming out with a statement against President Trump's proposal to empty Gaza of its inhabitants in order to reconstruct it. So it's a very delicate dance that he's trying to be a man for all seasons, but his true identity will be revealed once the other centers of power in Syria, such as the Druze community, such as the Kurdish forces, resist his leadership. Then we will see whether he is willing to forge a real coalition to compromise, or whether Syria will again sink into a civil war.
Colonel Wehbe, I'd like to start with you. Looking at this Al-Julani figure, he initially proclaimed here, "I'm coming to liberate Syria from the Iranians." Pushed back on the Iranian axis to include, of course, Hezbollah, other Shiite militias. And once he managed to oust them, even though he was not the first to reach Damascus and the number of bullets fired was less than a simple incursion, nonetheless, he sought to portray himself as a strong man who is capable of fighting off strong forces, despite the fact that they are on their knees following the various battles against Israel. But he was very vigorous in that approach. We saw people from Der'a, the first ones to enter Damascus, alongside, of course, also the Ahrar al-Jabal of the Sueda governorate, also entering behind, not too far. But we saw those different figures going into Damascus. Ahmed al-Ode, the leader of Der'a, met with al-Shara or Al-Julani, declared him to be great and a new alliance to be formed. But lo and behold, he returns to Daraa and announces, you know what? He's not the right man for Damascus and he's not the right man for Syria. So we, who started the revolution against the Assad regime, are going to keep at bay, despite also being Sunni Muslims and with same sympathies on the religious file. What are we to make out of that specifically?
Well, I'm afraid that this man with the double name, Al-Julani, on the one hand, the terrorist name, and Ashara, which is another name of the new president that is coming with a great hope to dominate Syria and to take Syria to a better place. I'm afraid that he is also coming with double strategy. There is a big gap between the declared diplomacy and the strategy that he is trying somehow to color this new regime, and with the messages to the West, to the Western world, to liberal ideas, less Islamistic. But on the ground, I'm afraid he's also continue to be Islamist. We can see on the ground that the new government is very much Islamist, and he puts aside actually a lot of local minorities and very central components of the Syrian society, like the Alawites, that are right now still seeking some kind of hope and stability in the region, and the Druze in the south, and of course the Kurds in the west, not to mention the Christian minority that has also played a very central role under the regime of Assad. Now, this man is still unstable, and I'm saying the following. He is seeking right now to legitimacy internally, and he knows very well if he doesn't gain the internal legitimacy inside Syria and the Syrian society, he will not be supported externally by the Arab world and by the, I guess, by America in particular, that remembers well his past, where he's coming from, and what kind of Syria he might be wrongly developing. And in this stage, after the post-Gaza scenario, we will see Syria geopolitically. It's a very central place. It will be the next stage. It will be the place that the all regional politics will be looking to the next day. Who will dominate the state? What will be the arrangements? We hear from the Arab countries that we don't want the Persian back and the Turkish in. It's also a new threat for the stability of the region, for our Arab culture. And here, it's a great opportunity for us all to continue the track of the normalization, and the Neo Syria can be part of the Saudi initiative together with the Arab supporters to be part of the normalization, away from Persian influence, away from the Turkish new influence in the region. And it's a great opportunity for us. And I think that we are still not doing the further step till now, as if we are waiting for something, and this something is the end of the Gaza crisis. The day after the next day, it will start all those questions in Syria.
Indeed. Well, General Kimmel, I'd like to hear your 2 cents on this. You actually and I had a lengthy conversation on this matter while the situation was even more fluid at the really start of the situation. And you cautioned, justifiably so, something that I immediately were preaching to the choir. But nonetheless, the enemy of your enemy is not necessarily your friend in every context. And here specifically, also, when we're talking about Al-Qaeda, we don't need to list too many of its atrocities to understand the characteristics of those individuals party to it. What are we to take of the various overtures, however, from the previous administration under the Biden team, as well as the Europeans seeking to push forward to somehow lift sanctions and consolidate the power of a group of individuals who have done nothing but kill and seek to fight Western civilization at large, and also its influence in the region?
Well, I think what first comes to mind is the old Wall Street term of TINA. There is no alternative. You can say what you want, but if you say the U.S. view is you can say what you want, but what's your alternative? What are you going to do? Helicopter in an expat and declare him king, premier, prime minister? No, there's nobody out there like that. Number two, even though he's got a hell of a past, some of the American revolutionaries were not exactly the best and the brightest and the most welcoming either, and they turned out okay. Number three, if the United States does not have a reasonable alternative other than to, as they say, judge him by his behavior, then the possible response is just completely pull out. And I don't think that's beyond the ken of Donald Trump. So I think at this point, the view of the Americans is let's judge him by his behavior. Let's not create a vacuum by pulling out. Let's acknowledge the fact that right now there is no other alternative, and let's make sure that we don't leave thereby creating a vacuum that someone else is going to fill, whether it's the Russians, whether it's the Turks, whether it's just another revolutionary or Islamist group that comes in. So at this point, tell me what the alternative is. Tell me what the better plan is. You can't just simply beat something with nothing. And right now, as everybody's complaining about this guy, they're trying to beat something with nothing.
Indeed. Well, with that being said, that is the Turkish Qatari narrative of there is no replacement, but there are separate individuals with quite the substantive strong power behind them that could serve as an alternative. They do not have nation states backing them or state actors backing them at this point, and therefore this Abu Muhammad al-Julani has a more of a viability stamp on him than others. But nonetheless, I'm not sure that no alternative is uh, the right characteristic when we're talking about who may lead Syria.
Well, you certainly haven't given me a better alternative. You talked about parachuting in some expat or some other person and displacing Jolani. That's not viable.
Uh, right, Colonel Wehbe, I'd like to hear your take on this. Are there alternatives in Syria?
Well, we should remember that we are here because there was a total failure of the new the post the Second World War state that it's a failed state that the people inside it could not live together peacefully, really, and establish some kind of modern state. So it's not behaving like a nation state totally. And here's the problem. Now, once again, we go back to the primordialic structure of the society. And I mentioned the Kurds, the Druze, the Alawites, and the Islamists now, they are the moderate Sunnis. A lot of groups that are not really managing till the moment to bring about their dream and vision for the next Syria. The problem is not the persons, it's the way and the ideology. I think that there are a lot of names in the air, and if you talk to Syrians, they do mention a lot of much more liberal names. I can imagine them in the next stage interfering, coming back to Syria, and trying to rebuild a new politics. Now we will never know the answer to this question before the next election. Ashara is talking about 4 years, preparing the constitution, disarming the groups. It's a track that it takes some years, but he has not been elected democratically till the moment. And the next election maybe will draw who will be and which group will dominate in which way. I guess that the next Syria is going to be decentralized, and those sects would like to live alone and together, each in his region with some autonomous control, but together as New Syria. Maybe there is a model also in Western Europe, like Spain, like Belgium, a lot of Western and very successful countries that such diversity internally can bring upon a very stable state when each group can live peacefully with his self-determination. The Druze will never be disarmed at this moment, nor the Kurds or the Alawites, and cannot be, trusting such a regime at the moment. It takes time. So the next Syria will be decentralized in my imagination, and the new person will be leading this state.
Of course, when we're speaking about Spain, I'm not sure how the Basques or the Catalanis look at the composition of the state as a successful, but that is one thing. Same goes for Belgium. They're talking about Flandern detaching from the French parts. So there are a lot of question marks here. Of course, what Dr. Wehbe is speaking about is the fact that there is a lot of resentment, specifically in Syria, with regard to the Sykes-Picot, particularly in context with the fact that Syria has seen one revolution after another. This is not the first time that Syria has been faced with some type of coup, and it brought a lot of misery to a country that, geostrategically speaking, the landmass itself and the location of it is very significant for the entire region, and beyond that, the state itself less so.
Yes, but Sykes-Picot is far from perfect, of course. But you remember what happened in Africa after colonization. Once you start unraveling one particular border between two former colonies, the entire continent can get into a morass. Now, Anand made a very intriguing comment regarding normalization with Saudi Arabia, which could include Syria, and Syria, of course, has been supported by Saudi Arabia. And I wonder whether, Anand, you mean that Israel would not have to negotiate over the Golan Heights with the new regime because it would let it go. And another point, ISIS. There is still American military presence, some 2,000 soldiers in Syria, because of the detention facilities, guarding them, perhaps guarding the oil. President Trump has been known to still wish to pull them out. We don't know yet whether he will. And the Tanif garrison. So there are many factors which will impact Syria, regardless of what Ahmed al-Shara wishes right now.
Well, General Kimmel, I'd like to hear your take on this, particularly since the National Security Council in Washington is the one leading right now the preparations for Trump's so-called foreign policy, also vis-a-vis Syria, with the numbers 2s and 3s in the various departments not yet occupied. And therefore, it is too premature to establish what may occur, particularly following the fall of the Assad regime. But if we're talking about both Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State or Daesh, we don't need to go too far away. The majority of the people making up today the interim government of Abu Muhammad Al-Julani, including his chief of intelligence, who just recently left both Daesh and Al-Qaeda, namely Anas Hattab, they're all members that know them very well, that believe what they believe. So where is the thin line between the two?
Well, I think the thin line is Ankara. The fact remains is you have a lot of people inside the U.S. administration right now that are very much behind the Kurdish forces up in the Northeast, the SDF, the YPG, whatever term you want to use. But I can certainly sit down. I can certainly see President Trump and President Erdogan sitting down, and President Erdogan making a case that, look, Turkey will take this over. We can take the north. We can have our buffer zone. We've already talked to Shara. He said it'll help you with the ISIS fight. You don't need the Kurds anymore. Uh, I could see that as entirely plausible, and that would give President Trump the opportunity to get out of Syria, which he tried to do last time, even though his national security staff and possibly his Defense Department staff will try to fight him on this. But if you put his staff against another authoritarian leader, I think the authoritarian leader is the one that's going to win out.
Indeed. Well, we don't have very much time left, and I still want to discuss the fact that there are currently clashing taking place between Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, namely the Damascus new forces of Damascus, and the Iranian proxy Hezbollah on the Lebanon border. What can you tell us about that?
Yes, it's a very important development. All of a sudden, of course, because Hezbollah was one of Assad's main supporters, and therefore there is quite a lot of hostility between the two groups. After many years of Syria not even recognizing Lebanon's independence and seeing it as a province of Syria, unjustly taken from it, not even having an ambassador there because it's a Syrian territory, and then, of course, going into Lebanon in its civil war in the 70s and not wishing to leave until 20 years ago. All of a sudden, they want to seal the border. They understand that if Syria is still going to play a part in transshipping Iranian munitions to Hezbollah, then Israel will strike it. Now, there is no Syrian army right now, or Syrian armed forces. Israel took it out, and we haven't heard anything about a rearmament program. We don't know who will send arms to the Syrian military. So for the time being, it is a very weak nation. But because of that, it doesn't want Hezbollah to interfere with its affairs and drag it into a war with Israel.
We do also need to take note of the fact that the Lebanese army itself is also scrambling to a significant deployment along the border.
And Israel
with
has
Syria.
struck the Hezbollah efforts to smuggle weapons out of Syria.
Smuggle weapons in breach of course, the cessation of hostilities. Another interesting point is that the first diplomatic decision of Abu Muhammad Al-Julani was to close the embassy of Syria in Beirut, which also indicates his perception of whether or not Lebanon is actually a legitimate state or not. But we are drawing near to the end of the program. We have roughly 1.5 minutes for both Colonel Wehbe and General Kimmett. Colonel Wehbe, we'll start with you. What are we to focus on for the next short to medium period when we're talking about Syria?
Yeah, I'm afraid that Syria is returning to the sequence of the military coups of the 60s. Again, the current regime, the new regime, just continues the same line of the previous regime. There's nothing new. He did not gain the trust of the militias. They are not disarmed, and the struggles will continue. Syria is the next stage of the struggle of a lot of forces on the ground in the Middle East.
Plenty of coups, and I think that Al-Julani should learn from the former and subsequently slain leader, namely President Shishikli, but we'll leave that education for him to pursue himself. General Kimmett.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of a dilemma for the international community if there is international recognition of Syria as a nation and Shara as its leaders, because that de facto makes the Alawites, the Druze, and the SDF illegal militias inside that country. At this point, al-Shara has been very clear, no federalism. Now the question is, does he have the capability to enforce that? Clearly the Kurds want their own federated state, as do the Druze, as do the Alawites. It is a good thing that Shara does not have the military power that he needs to take care of those issues. but that is also the aspiration of Turkey. And I could see the rearmament of the Syrian army being done by Turkey to rid northern Syria of those militia groups that have been for years and years a thorn in the side and a deadly component of the attacks on Turkey.
Roland?
It's been 2 months now since the fall of the Assad regime, and at the same time, the Israeli decision to deploy forces into Syrian territory, both across from the Golan Heights and not too far from there on the slopes of Mount Hermon, for various and good reasons, in order to preempt taking the high ground before hostile forces get there. But Israel would not be able to stay there much longer. Perhaps right after wintertime will come the time for decisions regarding the new arrangement. Andof, the UN force of observers supervising the line of separation, is still there. The mandate has been renewed in December, just at the time when all of this upheaval took place. So this is not yet over.
If I were in a position to advise the government here, I would tell him, so long as there's a fluid situation in Syria with an interim government that has no legitimacy to actually rule any other section of Syria, stay put, do not retreat, and remain within context of taking into account the national security interests, not only of the state of Israel, but also of Jordan, which is also very concerned of the developments there, and the national security interests of the United States at large. But with that, this is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank Colonel Wehebe, General Kimmett, and Mr. Oren for all of your insights, and I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition from here in Jerusalem. Shalom. Israel has launched operations
on Vladimir Putin.
helping Iran develop. We have logic, we have rationale, we understand how the system operates.